Hello, and welcome to another story of hope. My guest today is Karen Ekkens. We've had an opportunity to visit with Karen before, and this story will not disappoint either. So Karen, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
So, the last time that we had talked about your experience in Kenya, a near-death experience where you were on the edge, but this happened earlier in your life.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about Lebanon and how you and your family happened to be there.
Okay. Yes, I was 9 years old when we went over. It was kind of a sudden decision. My dad received a call to go to Middle East College and teach there. I think it was only 2 months before we actually had to be on the plane to go, so there was a lot of arrangements. And I had heard that Lebanon was war-torn and was very frightened of that, and certainly not, with my cautious nature, eager to go to a place that was war-torn, and prayed that the Lord would make it so we didn't go, but yet we did go. And that was one of the things that, looking back, I see He gives us what's good for us and not what we always ask for. It was a lesson that's comes around a lot in my life, and I need to learn it more easily.
So as a young person, just 9 years old, you were very much aware of what was taking place. That's why you were praying, I don't want to go there. It's a war-torn country. Mm-hmm. But your family went anyway, correct?
Yes. And, you know, looking back, it was just such a beautiful experience in terms of Lebanon is a beautiful place. There's the sea, and not very far up. You don't have to go very far to be up in the mountains and ski. It's just, and there's the beautiful ecosystems in between, lots of beautiful orchards and gardens, and the people are wonderful, friendly people. You know, that was our experience.
Now, you've given us a picture of your family in front of a tree, and I must admit that tree reminds me of one of the historic Lebanese flags with the tree that is in the middle of that. Is that tree somehow significant for that part of the world?
It is. It's a Cedar of Lebanon.
Okay.
So we read about those in the Bible, and yes, it is the one that's on the flag. Very beautiful, very symbolic.
Yes. Yeah, it is a beautiful tree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh,
Go
sure.
ahead and with the story.
Yes. So we went to Middle East College, and we're partway through the school year. There was always some civil unrest in the city, and the school is located up on a hill. At that point, was somewhat outside the city, and so we could look down over the hill and see the city down below and out beyond the Mediterranean Sea. Very scenic. And as the school year went by, the unrest increased in the, you know, I didn't know, wasn't aware of all the political situation, but just knew that the sounds that we would hear, there was always the sound of bullets and the sound of rockets and fighting of some sort, but it would increase in volume and intensity. And so one day, my parents were actually moving from an apartment up to a home, a faculty house up on the hill a little further. And my brother and I had been sent to the neighbors to play. So we were there playing dolls and having a good time in the house and hearing this escalation of the fighting down in the valley in the city. And their mom said to us, "Sit on the floor, kids." You know, we were below a window, and she said, "Just sit on the floor for your own safety." And so we were down there playing, and I was feeling a little sense of anxiety because my parents were not with me. And then another neighbor came down, and he said, he's from Georgia, so he said very calmly, he said, "I think y'all better come on up to the bomb shelter." Well, the bomb shelter was in the basement of their home, a duplex. And so we picked up our dolls and went up there. But before we went, I called my parents on the phone, and I said, "We're going to the bomb shelter. You gonna come?" and they said, "Yes, we'll be there soon." So that began a 10-day stint of our time in the bomb shelter.
Now you're talking about bullets bombs going off all times of the day and night. How did you ever sleep?
Well, if you think about 4th of July, right about 10 o'clock at night, that noise, magnify that and multiply it and say, those things aren't just noise, they're dangerous, they're life-threatening. It does make a person feel anxious and stressed. My dad, I don't remember this episode, but he remembers asking me, "Are you scared?" And I said, "Why should we be? The angels are with us." And so I think that was a real answer to my parents' prayers, that we would be at peace and be faith-filled. And I can remember even before we moved out of the apartment, just going out on the veranda and hearing a strange sound and noticing down below us 3 shiny bullets, one of them bent and very hot. My brother, of course, ran down and wanted to pick them up. But they had hit the plaster just above us. So somebody had us in their sights when we came out on the balcony and decided to send some bullets our direction. And that was not an uncommon experience.
Well, you're talking about being in the bomb shelter now. I cannot imagine what life would be like in a bomb shelter. And not just overnight, but for a stretch of 10 days. What was it like?
I was 9 years old and we were enjoying time with our friends. There were a number of families that were in there in the basement with us.
How big is this?
Not very big.
Not very
Just the
big.
basement. So there's the canning jars along the walls, and then on the floor, each family had our little section for our sleeping bags, and that was pretty much our space.
Concrete floor?
Concrete floor, very thick concrete walls, and everybody had to go around the back of the house and upstairs to use the bathroom. So a shared facility there, and but gratefully we had water, and it was fun to have friends there to play with all the time. I'm sure that our parents had a little bit of turmoil, but enjoyed them.
Well, we're living in a time where a pandemic has caused the authorities to issue stay-at-home orders, and people are living in close quarters for extended periods of time. And it's gone on more than 10 days, but usually with their own families, not with all these other families in a confined space. How did you get along? How could you get along? Weren't there any fights or arguments or anything like that going on in the shelter?
You know, in my recollection, it was very harmonious, and I thank God for that. We had worship times together. We had times when we would read the Bible, and it was very, very real to read Psalm 91 and to think about being under the shelter, of God, and to sing the hymns together and just know the strength that comes from corporate worship. I think that one of our favorites was, "Oh God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast." We could hear it right there. "And our eternal home. Under the shelter of thy throne still may we dwell secure. Sufficient is thine arm alone, and our defense is sure." And just to put our faith in that, the power of song and the power of his word, a very, very growing experience, and wonderful to do that with other believers.
Now, you shared a picture with us of some of the rockets that landed around your school. I think your brother's actually holding one which had exploded, and you see the remains of it. And then there's another one that is buried in the ground, and it proved to be a live round. I've heard stories of shells going back to World War II that were discovered, and people losing their lives as a result of that. Wasn't that scary?
Yes. There's also a sort of a sense of when it's common every day, you lose a little bit of that fear, or maybe it's not a good thing, but you lose some of that. That one that's buried in the ground landed within a foot of the water line and didn't detonate. And we were grateful to read Isaiah 33:16 and see, bread shall be given him, his waters shall be sure. And just claim that promise and say, this is how God chose to protect our water supply during the time that we were in the bomb shelter.
So you had one water supply into the college, and without that, you would have been without water.
Yeah.
And isolated and unable to reach out and get any because of the ongoing conflict.
Right. There was a bakery on the campus too, and they continued production of bread, and so we had our bread and we had our water and even some peanut butter and some fruit. We were blessed. There was one night that we sneaked down to the house to try to have some hot food. I remember my mom cooking beans on the stove. We had a gas stove and needed to keep everything, all the light, unseen. And I remember being a little concerned about the light of that gas burner. But we really enjoyed that hot food, the warm beans, and sneaked back to the bomb shelter to sleep the night. And the next morning was Sabbath. We went down for Sabbath lunch because the shelling had lulled just a little bit, and my mom also cooked rice. And so we had rice and beans. We were sitting at the table enjoying that, and we looked a little more closely and we said, what are these black things floating in the beans? And they were full of weevils. So we took those and put them in the kitchen and got rid of those. So we were eating our rice, and my brother looked at the rice and he said, "Is there a worm? Is that a worm on the rice?" And suddenly our appetites were diminished, and we said, "We love bread and peanut butter." And I'd like to go back to that.
Well, in the shelter, then for over a week and a half, you were just basically eating cold meals.
Right. But we had food, so we were grateful for that. Yeah.
You talked about a promise in Psalms that says that God will give his angels charge for us. What did that promise mean to you in the midst of the bullets flying, the bombs bursting in the air, all of those things?
Mm-hmm. It was very real, very, very comforting to think about his angels being there. It didn't completely take away our sense of anxiety or fear or stress. There were times, even after we left Beirut, if a car would backfire in the street, I would jump well beyond what another person might do. But there's still a calm in the midst of the storm that you don't have without those promises. And the precious connection that comes from knowing that God is there.
How does that experience influence your walk with God today?
Wow. Daily, I think that of the things that he's done in my past, and yes, there are times when I say, I'd really rather not be outside my comfort zone, but I look back and I say the times that I was were the times that I grew, and that's helpful. It doesn't always make me choose to do the thing outside my comfort zone, but it is precious to know how God walks with us, takes care of us, watches over us, and gives us even that reassurance that should death be our portion that day, there's a future beyond, and a powerful protecting. My dad has a lot of experiences. He went down with a number of people.
And you brought his book.
I did,
Maybe
yes.
you could hold that up so that our camera can see it
Okay.
over here. And what's the title of the book?
Angels in No Man's Land.
Okay.
Yeah, it's available at the church library, and maybe when we open up again and the library functions, can be available to be checked out, yes. There's some more pictures and adventures in there. He went frequently with a group to take bread from the bakery to people in the shelters in the city that were without food, and had many experiences. One time just driving down an alley and teenagers in t-shirts and jeans and machine guns pulled him back into the alley. And he didn't know how best to answer their questions because they couldn't tell from a uniform what side they were on or how they might respond to him. And he just prayed for help. And the Lord gave him words to say that made them relax. Okay, you can go on. And they learned later that there were some bodies back in those alleys where people had been killed because they hadn't answered correctly.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. We live in a time of unrest. We live in a time of pandemic. But you can trust the same God that Karen and her family trusted in times of crisis. Thank you for joining us for this story of hope.